Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to First Parish, Unitarian Universalists of Arlington.
We choose.
We choose.
We choose to be
A liberal religious community.
Welcoming.
Welcoming to all.
We encourage each other
on our spiritual journeys.
Support one another
through the changes in our lives.
And challenge the excesses
and injustices of our time.
Called to love.
To love.
To love.
And upheld by joy.
We live our faith.
In this house of worship, this sanctuary, let's settle into a time of prayer. Feel your feet on the ground and your hands in your lap. You may close your eyes or perhaps hold a soft gaze. Giver of life, wake us to joy. A tree glowing on full coral, the scent of baking bread, a smile from someone we don't know, that could be the first step to a friendship. So much of what we have, of what many of us have, is free and freely given. The love of family, a hug from a child, a kind word received. Bring to our awareness, however, that it is not so for all. Encourage the call to act that arises in us. Prompt us to protect the earth and environment and work to help the safety of all our neighbors and immigrant communities. Be with us during these hard times. Sustaining presence, be with those of us needing emotional support, those of us needing food, needing a home. Hold close those struggling with medical and mental health needs. Comfort families who have lost so much in wars and conflicts in Gaza and Sudan and other places in the world. Let there be peace and thanks to the veterans who have served in our military and given so much to our country. Loving God, stand by us when we are overwhelmed, unsure, self-critical, and tired. Remind us that connections are made slowly. Inspire us to use our gifts to heal both ourselves and others. We ask these things in the name of love as we remain in a period of stillness and meditation.
I will admit, I used to find histories utterly irrelevant and boring. I mean, who wants to read about all these dead people? And I resented having to memorize dates and significant events that didn't even include me in the picture. When we talk about US history, for example, all I could read about were my people working the transcontinental railroads, right? And that was about it. It wasn't until, and that reminded me, by the way, of that poem by Langston Hughes. I don't know if any of you heard of it. America never was America to me. That's what I wanted to say about my history and my supposed representation in it. So ironically enough, it wasn't until I got to seminary and I started taking Christian history classes that I fell in love with history. Can you believe it? Because here I was thinking all along, Christianity is nothing more than Constantine, the Crusades, and colonialism. And that's just the C's, right? Who would want to read about that and learn about that? But I attribute it to my seminary professor, who was a self-described agnostic, lapsed foot-washing Baptist, who had a tendency and a propensity for going out to the balcony of our classroom and yelling, "Thank the baby Jesus!" And who said that the only way she could get to heaven is on the coattails of her students, that when she meets St. Peter, she'll just say, "Oh, I taught her, let me in." But what made history come alive for me in that classroom setting is learning about things like revisionist history, right? Similar to the Time for All Ages earlier today of what if we were to reimagine how history went when presented with new facts and evidences. Unfortunately, those on the other end of the political, religious, theological spectrum have also used revisionist history to co-opt and to sweep away things that they find inconvenient around US history, for example, like slavery, too hard to deal with, so let's just erase it or hit the delete button, right? I'm looking at you, Texas and Florida. So there's that part of it, but there's also another way to look at history, which is reclaiming history and how empowering that is, especially for those who have been historically marginalized. And this was the exciting part about reading on Christian history, is to figure out the herstory side of it, right? And that at some point in time, women were actually priests and bishops. Did you know that? But there was new evidence when I was going through seminary that pointed at that, and that was so empowering, especially for my female colleagues who saw themselves in the herstory of their faith. And it was a shock to me that one could actually rewrite history so that it could ring truer for who we are and who we want to become. And an instance of this is with the Wampanoag tribe, not too far from here, right? Because we all have probably learned the real story around the first Thanksgiving, right? Yeah, how problematic is that? It would take another whole sermon to unpack that story. But let's just say that there's a way to look at it other than that Norman Rockwell portrait from the 1950s of what Thanksgiving is all about. So you may be asking yourself now, how did history get so screwed up, right? Maybe not in those exact terms, but sort of, kind of, right? And I propose that part of it is because we've added this layer of nostalgia to history. And what does nostalgia mean? According to Wikipedia, nostalgia is the sentimental longing and wistful affection for the past, typically for a place or period of happy personal association. Aren't you impressed that I memorized the definition from Wikipedia? So what does that mean? And I would add to it, it's not just a happy personal association, but sometimes a happy collective association. And this is when we start idealizing, romanticizing, and oftentimes politicizing our version of history, right? Ever heard of this party called the Grand Old Party that wants to hearken us to the good old days back when America was great, right? And the question I have is, great for who? Right? Again, going back to that Langston Hughes poem. And the implication and what they're usually saying behind that statement is it was great until those people ruined it for the rest of us. And you could just fill in the blank of who those people are, which tends to be, again, historically marginalized folks. It's the Jews that ruined it. It's the Black people that ruined it. It's the trans folks that ruined it for the rest of us, right? Nostalgia gets us back to that place, and the right does not have a monopoly on nostalgia, believe it or not, and it's not a newfangled phenomenon. Let's look back in the Hebrew Bible, for example, and the story about the Israelites roaming in the wilderness for 40 years after they left Egypt. Remember the sense of nostalgia that then started brewing for these folks? They're like, manna, manna, manna. I'm so sick of it. I've boiled manna, I've deep stir-fried it. There's only so many recipes you could use with manna. There's not even spices to use. I mean, oh my gosh, no saffron? What do you mean? What am I gonna have this manna with, right? As a foodie, I'm so offended. At least in Egypt, we had meat and vegetables. You know, what do we have here out in the desert? Nothing but manna. So they started whining just like that, right? And they started blaming their leaders, and they blamed God for the situation they found themselves in, because conveniently, they forgot the fact that they were slaves back in Egypt, right? So this whole sense of selective memory and thinking about a seminal longing about a past that may or may not have been an accurate situation of what really took place back then. So speaking of 40 years in the wilderness, that reminded me of the interim period that we are in right now, which for some of you may seem like such a long time. But before I get into that, I also want to talk a little bit more about what also felt like a long time for me, which was my divorce process, which did take about a year and a half for the courts to finally adjudicate. And I must say that there were certain parts of it when I felt that sentimental longing of, oh, if I could have only stayed where I was, you know, what if something else would have been different? What if there would have been a different outcome? Or I could have rushed that rebound process and thought to myself, you know, if only I could start dating again and find the right one, that would solve all my problems for me, right? But that's not what my therapist said, unfortunately. And so I had to do that hard work, because I thought to myself, just like the Israelites, what if they saw that 40 years and that wilderness experience as an opportunity instead of a threat, right? That they used that as a point of collective introspection, of trying to figure out what are we supposed to do at this point so that when we write the next chapter of our history, it will look a lot different than before. And so I started thinking about what my former minister said to me when I went for pastoral care 22 and a half years ago, you know, when I first got involved in that relationship and already encountered the first conflict. She said, you could either work it out with this one or the next one. Right? That made a lot of sense to me. And again, what if that was our similar attitude about this interim period? That we could either work it out with me. I'm your rebound minister. Congratulations. Right? So use me and exploit me in a holy way. Don't take that literally, by the way. I have feelings too. So why don't we use this as an opportunity to go deeper and do some introspective work and to find out how we could get unstuck and undo some of these patterns that no longer serve us well. because we could either work it out with this one or the next one, right? And again, I feel like sometimes it's easier said than done. According to Thich Nhat Hanh, people have a hard time letting go of their suffering. Out of a fear of the unknown, they prefer suffering that is familiar. I'm going to repeat that again. And since I'm people, I'm going to, twist Ty's words a little bit and say that we have a hard time letting go of suffering. Out of the fear of the unknown, we prefer suffering that is familiar. And I can only imagine that that's probably what the ancient Israelites were thinking about and going through at the same time, that they are in this new location, but it's unfamiliar to them. But what they probably didn't realize is that if they never changed who they were or what they were thinking or how they were doing things, then they were just going to take that suffering with them all the way back to the promised land, right? Without any change happening. When in reality, what would have helped with that suffering is to leave their suffering behind in the desert where it belongs. So looking back at the beginning of my divorce process to where I am now, I could honestly say I don't even recognize that person from 5 years ago. I left that person out in the desert. And it wasn't all because of how brilliant or fabulous I am, but it was because I went through a lot of hard work in order to get here. And I did not allow myself to get distracted by dating right away. And by the way, if you recall, 5 years ago, it was the middle of the pandemic, so we weren't supposed to be dating anyway, right? So that helped, right, in terms of my rebound process. And up until this point, I'm still not dating because I've gotten so used to it. So, not to say that I won't date again in the future, but I'm just saying that what's more important is that I was able to use that opportunity to go deeper into my spiritual practices and to talk to my therapist on a weekly basis and to talk to my spiritual director and to enlist a breathing coach. I didn't even know such a person existed, you all. A breathing coach to help you figure out how to breathe, right? It was all so helpful for me to realize that in order to get through my suffering, I needed to do something different. Because if I went through the suffering that was familiar to me, that would just be like spinning my wheels over and over and over again. So that's the question I have for you today, is where do you want to go as a congregation? And what does the promised land look like? And is the goal just to get to your next settled minister already? Right? I would say, and I would suggest, that the goal of this interim period is actually for you all to figure out how to be a different congregation. Because, there's so many things that are good about you all, right? But I must also say that there have been instances in the history of this congregation that are associated with not so happy types of associations. All right? I know that's hard to believe, but let me just say that sometimes you don't handle conflict well. Need I talk about when this building, this meeting house burned down, and how some people left because they did not like the architecture of the new building, right? Or conflict over ministers, right? And so whatever, or Ruggate. Let's not even get into Ruggate, right? Which just happened recently. Whatever it is that we find an opportunity to fight about, how can we fight well? And how can we use conflict as a transformative and faith development kind of opportunity. So yeah, for me, one of the goals is for this congregation to be able to handle conflict well and to come back into right relationship again. That's one of the goals I want for us during this interim period. Another goal is to have clarity about our vision of where we want to go. And another goal that I would like us to think about is for us to be crystal clear about our mission and how we could put love at the center in a world that is in a love deficit this very minute. Those are the goals. And if we could fulfill those goals, then a byproduct for that would be attracting the ideal, not perfect, minister for this congregation, right? So history is a living thing. We don't need to get stuck with our history. We are in the process of writing our history right this very minute, because guess what? The good news is the now is full of infinite possibilities. But it is with our choices and with our actions that we are able to write this history together. Guess what? The best days of First Parish of Arlington is not behind us. It is ahead of us. It is right in front of us. The future is yet to be written. Will you join me in keeping moving forward